morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this Friday. Yes, it is Friday, and thank God it's Friday. Such an eventful weekend. There's so much that's going to be happening out there. Well, right now, let's take a look at the weather. 17 degrees and sunny, a beautiful time of the year. And if you look out the window, it is just amazing and gorgeous from here. Well, ladies and gentlemen, right now, let's get on with the news. As we know, there's a lot that's happening about the referendum, and there's lots of people making commentaries. Well, right now, even AI has gone into that. Let's hear their voice.
Hey there, I am sure you have heard about the upcoming voice referendum in which every Australian will be asked a question and will be required to answer either a yes or a no on the ballot paper. The specific question is, a proposed law to alter the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. Do you approve this proposed alteration?
Well, there you go. AI generated voice for the campaign. Right now, let's look at what Australian exporters are saying about LSD detection after suspension from Malaysia.
Why do you think Malaysia has taken this step?
I think Malaysia took this step mainly because of the step that Indonesia took a few weeks ago to ban imports from 4 establishments. So I think it's really just following sort of their neighbour, really, in this case.
Yeah. Give us an idea of what lumpy skin disease actually is.
Okay, so lumpy skin disease, it's caused by a virus. It's a pox virus, so it's in the same family as chickenpox or monkeypox. And it's really a disease that we saw in Africa. It was really described in Africa. It stayed in Africa for a long time. And then there was a major incursion into Europe in 2015. Then we saw in 2019 it moved into Asia, into China and India and Bangladesh and Nepal. And then in 2020 and 21, it really swept through Southeast Asia, and it ended up in Indonesia in 2022. So it's one of these diseases that has come out of Africa and just apparently spread around major continental spread during that period.
Yeah. And what happens to the animals if they contract it?
So it basically causes skin lesions. So it causes these sort of nodules or lumps. That's where the disease name comes from. They do sort of ulcerate after a while. So all over the body, you get these disfiguring sort of lumps. It is a disease that affects a lot of animals. So when a herd becomes infected, maybe 50% of the animals are affected, but it doesn't really kill many animals. It's more debilitating. It causes production effects, the animals get weak, they lose condition, milking cows will stop milking and so on. So it's a very economic disease. That's why countries don't really want to have it.
Yeah, so they recover in the end, but it does take a hit in the meantime. Has there ever been any evidence to suggest Australia has this disease among livestock?
Yeah, that's very interesting. So no, we've never seen the disease in Australia, and we report to the World Organization for Animal Health. So as far as that organisation is concerned at the moment, we're free of the disease. It's never been identified. So it's a real surprise, these recent events in the last month, quite unprecedented. We haven't really seen this sort of thing happen before.
Yeah, interesting. Indonesia apparently did acknowledge that some animals may have passed through the Northern Territory carrying the disease. Is that possibly where this concern has started?
Yeah, it needs a lot more investigation. I haven't seen the actual data. Some animals tested positive on arrival. Animals are tested when they're exported on arrival at the importing country. So in this case, Indonesia. So the issue becomes, when were those tests done? Were the tests reliable? When might those animals have been exposed to the disease? Traditionally, it's been sort of transmitted through insects, so, biting insects, mosquitoes and biting flies, ticks, and so on. So that's quite intriguing. I mean, it has changed recently. There's been more contact, animal-to-animal contact. So it's a bit of a mystery if they tested positive when they arrived, when they might have actually been exposed. Could they have been exposed in port in Indonesia or on the trip over? or as, or it has to be ruled out that they weren't exposed on Australian soil. That's the key issue.
Well, and to that point, what now has to happen to try and determine what went on and how to ensure that it hasn't entered Australia somehow?
Yeah, well, there needs to be a thorough investigation, and I'm sure that's happening at the moment. Both a sort of forensic investigation of the actual, what we call an outbreak, so putting together the pieces of information, evidence, to work out exactly when that exposure occurred. There would be more surveillance it's particularly Northern Australia, and that's our sort of at-risk area, and that's where the cattle exports are coming from. We do test animals for a variety of exotic diseases. A lot of it's passive surveillance, so say cattle producers reporting disease, and this disease is very easy to identify, very characteristic skin lesions. So it would be sort of going through those records and ensuring that system is correct, that we can actually demonstrate we are free. So it's putting a lot of layers of different data and evidence together, putting the case again before essentially the World Court, which is the World Organization for Animal Health, and saying or showing, demonstrating that we don't have the disease.
Yeah.
It's a scientific progress from now on.
Yeah, it's interesting. And there's no evidence, it's never happened before, that it spreads from animals to humans?
No, as far as we know, it's not one of those diseases that can infect people. So there's no issue of eating or consuming meat or milk or even touching these animals. It's not transmitted to humans.
Well, that might be the case, but I think it does pose that question, and it's sort of if you are consuming that meat, you would be a little bit concerned, I would think, but that's my observation on the situation. And when it starts in one place and it spreads, and if we can keep it out of Australia, that would be wonderful. But right now, for the next news, we look at Australia and its veterans. So when we talk about veterans, what about female veterans? Should they be always included?
Big news.
The last 2 decades have reshaped Australia's perception of war. For some women, part of those modern conflicts, there was another battle to fight.
You're going to see out of the Royal Commission into veteran suicide the volume of disgusting abuse, particularly against women who have served.
Australian Army nurse Vivian Bullwinkle has broken the bronze ceiling at the memorial. Iraq veteran Sarah Watson wants her service and that of her female colleagues better represented.
They all deserve, I think, so much more recognition than they get.
Women made up 12% of personnel who served in the Middle East. The memorial is consulting with veterans from across services, ranks and genders about how to best honour their service.
It's really important to make sure that everybody's seen here. So we're talking about the importance of women being shown, but also, other diverse groups as well.
Inside the new galleries, female mannequins, uniforms, collection items and photography will tell the modern story of Australia's women at war.
Probably associated with about 30% of the stories that are going in the new galleries are actually associated in predominantly women's stories.
A survivor of post-traumatic stress disorder, Sarah Watson is part of a generation whose service has affected their mental health.
I found it really hard to come here for a number of years post my Iraq service.
The new galleries could help veterans like Sarah to recover.
I think being able to come to the War Memorial will be part of that healing journey, to be able to say I was part of this time in history and I'm proud of that.
A fairer history under construction. James Fiver, ABC News, Canberra.
I think it's a step in the right direction, equal recognition for equal work. If you have done the hard yakka, you should be recognized, regardless of whether you're male or female. That should not be the question at all. The question would be on the service and the work that you have done with respect and honor. So there we are. Right now, another news that we have is these days you've seen lots of people vaping tobacco, and the tobacco is now sold behind, they're not made available, they're not very visible on counters or shops or wherever they're made available. So that leads to illicit tobacco trade.
had a lock on that gate, is that correct?
Just before dawn, police and Border Force officers are preparing for a major drug bust.
This is serious organised crime doing this. This is worth a lot of money to criminal enterprises.
A short drive away is one of the suspected properties in the Gold Coast hinterland. A 7:30 crew has been invited to observe. It's not a hard drug they're targeting, in fact it's sold legally, but there's big money to be made in illicit tobacco.
We'll allege this is one syndicate's operation and that they have a fairly extensive distribution network here in southeast Queensland.
Behind this fence is one of 11 properties being raided on the Gold Coast and northern New South Wales as part of Operation Harvest Home. Shortly after the raid, a van arrives with what's believed to be a fresh delivery. The driver is questioned but not charged.
At the moment, we've seized approximately 250,000 cigarette sticks. In addition, we found around $1 million across a number of premises. And then we've referred a number of products to state authorities as well for seizure.
At the end of the day, these estimates skyrocket. Nearly 3 million cigarettes, 400 kilos of loose tobacco and illicit nicotine vapes worth more than $5 million.
Have we disrupted the syndicate? I think we have, but we can't stop. We just need to keep going at these groups, including their offshore networks, to shut it down.
I think we need to continually be vigilant given the high amounts of income and revenue for the Australian community at stake, but also the level of harm that we see in the community, that we continue to see in the community as a result of tobacco use.
Cigarettes in Australia are taxed heavily to stop people smoking. Without incurring these taxes, illicit tobacco is often much cheaper.
So anything that interferes with the price of tobacco products has the impact to actually keep people addicted to tobacco for longer.
And Border Force says the fact that tobacco can also be a legal drug is immaterial.
From our perspective, it's the fact that they're not paying duty on those cigarettes when they're bought across the border, they're not paying the tax that is owed, and they're making a profit. These are organised crime groups that are profiting from the illegal sale of illicit tobacco.
Some illicit tobacco, or chop as it's often called, is grown locally. The majority is smuggled in from overseas.
Primarily in areas like China and Malaysia, but also from the Middle East. And then it's distributed domestically, so it's produced lawfully in those countries where it's not an offence to sell tobacco in that way, and then it's smuggled into the country.
The illicit tobacco market in Australia is not only growing, it's also becoming more sophisticated. Repacking tobacco in empty cigarette boxes to make the product look more legitimate.
The Australian Border Force has started to see suspected imports from criminal organisations of empty plain packaging being imported into Australia and packed on shore with illegally grown tobacco.
To me, that probably points to some more organisation and recognition of the potentially high financial gains that are at stake.
Criminal syndicates recently found a loophole that made it perfectly legal to import empty cigarette packets, provided they carry the Quitline logo.
Just stop smoking before it's too late, because it will get you.
But the logo is subject to copyright law, and the copyright owner, the Cancer Council of Victoria, last month lodged a legal objection notice that effectively closed the loophole down.
When we found out about this, it certainly pointed to the level of sophistication that's now involved and the lengths that we see elements are prepared to go to subvert Australia's very strong anti-smoking laws.
Back on the Gold Coast, officers seized more illicit product in this storage building. It's one of 3 allegedly being used by the syndicate for product drops. Border Force, along with state and federal police, Queensland Health and the Therapeutic Goods Administration, are now preparing to go to court.
Now we will go through all the evidence that we've seized and we'll look to preferred charges and brief evidence.
Australia has really set the world standard in terms of reducing harms from tobacco products. So there's a lot at stake here for the Australian community.
So there you have it, and we thought we were in a smoke-free zone, and that cigarettes and tobacco would now be on the way out, but no, they're still making their way in, they're still creeping in. And vaping has just taken things like anything. There are new stores that I've noticed being opening in many areas as well. Something really needs to be done. Something's just not right. It just doesn't gel. Well, vaping, cigarettes, tobacco, smoke, they all cause harm to the environment. So what about the young Australians? Are they worried about that or just climate change in general?
So look, every young person is obviously different, and a lot of people of all ages are experiencing, I think, what researchers are calling climate anxiety, as you mentioned there. But, there's researchers in this area, and organisations like Headspace do say that there are a number of people who have been coming to them with worries and concerns around climate change and around their futures. And I'm sure many people watching would not be surprised to hear that young people are experiencing that, since they will be the ones dealing with this in the future. But there have also been surveys. There was one survey of 10 different countries, including Australia, that asked 16 to 25-year-olds how they feel about climate change, and 59% of them said they felt very or extremely worried about climate change, while 75% said they saw the future as frightening. A lot of different reports there, but I went out to a high school and spoke to some year 9s and 10s to see how they're feeling about climate change, and if they are worried about it, what might help them feel less worried. So let's take a look.
When I hear about climate change, it does make me feel scared, and because there's just not enough people listening out and putting enough effort to change what's happening.
I'm mainly concerned about what would happen in the future.
I don't want our home to be destroyed, and knowing that that's happening as I'm here and I can't do anything about it bothers me.
In the future, it's going to be even worse. Earth is not going to be livable for us. So we're going to need to change something, which makes me worried because we're not changing anything right now.
If I was to learn more about what my age group could do to prevent anything bad happening,
it would make me feel less worried if I knew the government was actually trying to do something and not just letting it all happen. So I'd like to see more kids my age protesting. I'd like to see resources available for us to find the information and for us to know that those resources exist.
So what's the best way to deal with climate anxiety, Amelia?
Well, as you heard there, a lot of the young people I spoke to, they said that they actually want more information about climate change, and that would help sort of calm their worries and feelings of anxiety, actually having more info from adults and also finding out more about what they can do about it. So that I thought was a really interesting factor. It's also important, Rose, that we remember that with climate anxiety, it isn't just feelings of anxiety and worry. According to researchers, it's also feeling overwhelmed, feeling hopeless, disheartened, and even angry at the inaction and the idea that maybe this didn't even have to happen. So for people who are kind of experiencing those feelings, in particular young people, researchers say that there's evidence that even just small actions can really help them feel more empowered and help them feel better about this issue. So that can be, just thinking about the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle. One of my favourite recommendations was to try and, reduce fast fashion by potentially, going to op shops and vintage shops, because I love shopping. So that was a good one. I was keen on that idea. And, helping the environment that way. But there are lots of different steps that young people can take. But on top of that, it's also just really important that young people understand that, if they are feeling like this, it is actually normal and they aren't alone. If, no one was worried about climate change, then there would be no action and nothing would change. But it's also good for young people to know that if they are feeling like they can't even take those small actions and that they need to just take a break from all of these conversations around climate change, that's okay too. And that they can switch off from the news, from social media. And I say this as a news content creator and journalist. It's okay to switch off from the news. We all have to do it now and then. And just know that you're not alone, and make sure you speak to somebody about it.
And speaking to someone about it is always good. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's about all we have for you on this Friday, the 11th of August. Well, right now, the temperature's gone up one more tick. It's 18 degrees and sunny as we look at the functions and events taking place. So there you are, ladies and gentlemen, up to date with the Australian Indian Radio. And it's been wonderful having your company on this Friday, the 11th of August 2023, 18 degrees and sunny as we are counting down towards India Day Fair 2023 on the 19th of August at Roma Street, Parklands. We'd love to see you there. But until that time, it is goodbye from us from this show. We will be back tomorrow with the weekend edition. Have a lovely weekend.